know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gale Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This talk begins my revisionist history discussion of New Mexico Territory's Lincoln County War. The information is from my book, The Santa Fe Ring versus Billy the Kid, The Making of an American Monster. One can say that the Lincoln County War was caused by the Santa Fe Ring's most gruesome land grab. And that war ended the 1870s territory-wide anti-ring uprising. They're discussed in Talk 11. They were crushed with escalating brutality. The 1872 legislature revolt was triggered by the ring wanting to void acts stopping ring-eyed judges' power for malicious prosecutions. The 1876 Grant County Rebellion was triggered by the rings wanting to block that county's legislative power to oppose it. The Colfax County War was triggered by the rings wanting the Maxwell land grant settlers' land. But what did the ring want in Lincoln County? Key was who was doing the wanting. It was the ring's territorial boss, Thomas Benton Catron. He wanted Lincoln County for himself. At that time, it was the biggest county in the United States. It was 30,000 square miles, or 19,200,000 acres. It was bigger than combined Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, Rhode Island, and Delaware. It was the southeast quarter of almost square New Mexico Territory. There, Katrin sought mercantile and ranching monopolies and supply contracts to its Fort Stanton and the Mescalero Indian Reservation. And after illegally defeating earlier anti-ring uprisings with impunity, Katrin was emboldened for takeover of Lincoln County. He would cause the Lincoln County War. To cover up Thomas Benton Catron as responsible for the horrors that followed, his ring-denying hagiographer, Victor Westphal, in his 1973 book, Thomas Benton Catron and His Era, parroted the ring's lie, as did 20th century historians. Claimed was that the Lincoln County War was a local conflict between the mercantile business of Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan, known as the House, and that of British newcomer John Tunstall and his ally, cattle king John Chisholm. Apologist Westphal made up that Katrin's role was, quote, shrouded in mystery, close quote, and that, quote, at no time was he personally in the region, close quote. This is the so-called plausible deniability defense used by layered organized crime, like the Santa Fe Ring. As I discussed in Talk 10, By 1970, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, defeated it. It stated, if conspirators have a plan which calls for some conspirators to commit the crime and others to provide support, the supporters are as guilty as the perpetrators. So RICO explains Katrin's guilt in Lincoln County. What follows is T.B. Katrin's involvement without having to set foot in Lincoln. Ironically, it is Westfall who provided Katrin's economic links to Lincoln County. They translate into Katrin's motive for eliminating John Tunstall. Katrin had been making monopolistic inroads in Lincoln County since his 1866 territorial arrival and founding of the Santa Fe Ring with co-boss Stephen Benton Elkins. He'd immediately dealt in military beef contracts. By 1868, Katrin's records show receipts for merchandise signed by Lawrence Murphy. That linked Katrin to Fort Stanton's beef suppliers, Emil Fritz and Lawrence Murphy, then operating its Sutler store as L.G. Murphy and Company. At the fort were also Katrin's future minions, store employee James Dolan, and then Major and future Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady. According to historian Philip Rash, Katrin, as owning the First National Bank of Santa Fe, was the silent backer of L.G. Murphy and Company. In 1873, the business was expelled from Fort Stanton after ruffian James Dolan tried to kill a soldier. Katrin's backing built them Lincoln's huge two-story general store and post office called The House. On 40 acres, it was 9 miles from the fort. It was the Ring's stronghold in Lincoln County. Its builder, George Pepin, became a Ring loyalist. Ultimately, he was the sheriff at the Lincoln County War. Westfall also revealed Katrin as silent owner of Dolan's supposed Pecos River cow camp. It held John Chisholm's rustled cattle. Katrin also controlled Mescalero Indian Reservation agent Frederick Godfroy to guarantee acceptance of the house's stolen cattle, shoddy hay, and mealy flour for its supply contract. Katrin's direct contact to Agent Godfroy and Lincoln County was through his business agent, David Easton, housed in Blazer's Mill within the Mescalero Indian Reservation. Easton also managed the house's brewery for Katrin. In the Lincoln County War, as Justice of the Peace, David Easton served the Ring by writing false arrest warrants on May 30, 1878, outlawing Alexander McSween and regulators for malicious prosecutions. Katrin's minions replicated his political terrorism. They caused Lincoln County's real troubles. The House oppressed cash-strapped locals with supplies sold on a usurious credit while underpaying them for their farming produce. In 1875, in Lincoln, local rancher Robert Casey was murdered by the Ring immediately after he won an election against Lawrence Murphy. A month later, Juan Patron, Lincoln's anti-Ring Hispanic leader, was crippled in attempted assassination by the House's future partner, John Riley, Katrin's cattle dealer. By 1876, With Lawrence Murphy terminally ill, James Dolan, as local ring boss, added John Riley as his partner, renaming the business J.J. Dolan and Company. Westfall topped off Katrin's Lincoln County interest by stating that his brother-in-law, Edgar Walsh, was also his agent there. Walsh ran Katrin's Carrizozo Land and Cattle Company ranch. Katrin got it from dying Lawrence Murphy to settle Murphy's debt to him. It was 20 square miles. But by 1877, it was Katrin who had troubles himself. In 1876, a British settler named John Henry Tunstall had arrived in Lincoln. By 1877, he had built his own large general store just a quarter-mile east of the house. It had Lincoln County's first bank. He made 2 cattle ranches along the west to east Felis and Penasco rivers to control grazing land all the way to the north to south Pecos River by controlling the water. He used his employees, like Billy Bonney, to homestead land on the Penasco River after buying another ranch there from a Jacob Basil Billy Matthews. His fair dealings were bankrupting the house. He had sites on the house's beef contracts to the Mescalero Indian Reservation and Fort Stanton. So by 1877, Katrin's goal of mercantile and cattle monopolies was threatened. Tunstall was one of the few people in the territory with considerable cash through his wealthy British father, so he could compete aggressively in the cash-poor territory. In a fair market, he would have won. Magnifying risks to Katrin's goals was high-minded Lincoln attorney Alexander McSween. He knew ring crimes after working for the House from 1875 to 1876. He was inspiring Tunstall's anti-ring fervor. So, Tunstall's competitor was Thomas Benton Catron himself. Tunstall and McSween exposed the house's Fort Stanton and Mescalero Indian Reservation supply scams. In 1878, their complaint triggered Department of Interior investigator E.C. Watkins's investigation. It showed that Indian agent Godfroy was giving reservation supplies, like blankets, to supply the house. He was getting Russell beef from outlaw John Kinney and his gang. Godfroy was also billing for 1,500 Apaches, while only a few hundred were actually there. Katrin was also having troubles with his cattle rustling victim, John Chisholm, a cattle king with herd of 80,000 along the Pecos River. He'd been empowered by Tunstall's business alliance and had been made president of Tunstall's Lincoln Bank. On January 12, 1878, Katrin emerged from his secret partnership with the House, then going bankrupt from Tunstall's competition. Dolan and Riley mortgaged it to Katrin with its 40 acres. The transaction was done in Lincoln by Katrin's law partner, William Thornton. Katrin put his brother-in-law, Edgar Walsh, in charge of the house. So when Tunstall was murdered on February 18th, the house was Katrin's. This was no local mercantile competition. To protect his Lincoln County schemes, Katrin needed a beholden governor. Through John Riley, he had loaned Governor Samuel Beach Axtell $1,800. That was half of Axtell's salary. It would guarantee his proclamation shielding Tunstall's ringite murderers from prosecution. So, by 1878, in place were Katrin's enforcers. William Brady was Lincoln's first sheriff. The district attorney was William Reinerson. The 3rd Judicial District Judge was Warren Bristol. The Seven Rivers rancher, rustler, cattle suppliers were available for violence. Rustling outlaw gangs of Jesse Evans and John Kinney were available too. And only 9 miles from Lincoln was Fort Stanton, with its ring-biased commanders being first George Purrington, then Colonel, and A.M. Dudley. Crushing earlier uprisings left Katrin confident of his elimination tactics. John Tunstall would have seemed easy. But Katrin didn't anticipate Lincoln County citizens' resistance. It would make him resort to atrocities and treason to win. And, as we shall see in other talks, Katrin would not have guessed that he would encounter the most dangerous adversary yet to his schemes, a teenager named Billy Bonney.